The nursery door was open 3 inches, just enough for her voice to slide through like a blade under a door, and I heard the word before I understood I would carry it for the rest of my life. Convenient, that was all. Marrying her was simply convenient. Hazel's mouth went still against me for a moment, the way babies do when the air around them changes, before their mothers even notice. And I sat there in the rocking chair, with my daughter's whole trusting weight in my arms, and felt something in my chest fold in on itself like wet paper. I did not move. I did not call out. I counted the seconds between one breath and the next, 4, 5, 6, because counting was the only thing my hands knew how to do when the rest of me had stopped working. Freya Calder's voice did not rise. It never rose. That was the whole terrifying architecture of her, calm in crisis, cold in comfort, a woman the shipping papers called the Winter Harbor because nothing that reached her ever came back warm. I had married that voice 11 months ago in a courthouse with a rented bouquet. I had built a daughter with that voice, skin and breath, and the small, stubborn chin that was undeniably, unmistakably Calder. And I had spent 11 months telling myself that the coldness was a coat she wore for other people, not for me. Convenient, nothing more. Hazel found my finger and closed her whole hand around it, 6 weeks old and already stronger than she had any right to be, and I looked down at her and thought, not for the first time, that she deserved a mother who did not sit frozen in a rocking chair, absorbing blows meant for someone else's ears. I should have walked out into that hallway. I should have made Freya say it to my face. Instead, I sat very still in the lamplight, with my daughter's mouth going slack in sleep against me, and I let the sentence settle into my bones the way cold settles into a house with the heat cut off, not all at once, but completely. To understand how a woman ends up sitting in the dark, counting her own heartbeats over 4 words, you have to go back to before there was a nursery at all, before there was a Calder in my name, back to the night I found the numbers that did not add up. I was 25 then, working the graveyard shift at Calder Maritime's dockside processing office, checking manifests against cargo weights under a fluorescent light that buzzed like it resented existing. My father had been a longshoreman for the company for 30 years before his lungs gave out, and when he died, he left me 2 things: a debt to a private lender the Calder family had quietly absorbed after his accident, and a battered leather ledger full of his handwriting, route notes and tide tables, and the one thing he used to say to me when I was small and afraid of the water: steady hands find the way home. I kept that ledger in my desk drawer at the docks, the way other people keep photographs. My sister Lark was 14 then, and her kidneys were failing in the slow, expensive way that terrifies a person more than any sudden catastrophe could, because it gives you time to watch the number on the hospital bill grow faster than hope does. I took every shift I could get. I learned the manifest system the way some people learn a language out of desperation, until I could read a cargo sheet the way a musician reads a score. And that was how I noticed, on a Tuesday in March, that container counts on 3 consecutive shipments did not match their declared weights by amounts too precise to be accidents. Someone was skimming, not stealing outright. That would have been caught, but shaving fractions of percentage points off manifests across dozens of routes, a wound so small it would take years to bleed the company dry. I reported it up the chain the way you are supposed to, and it went nowhere, because the falsified numbers led, if you followed them far enough, toward people with names too large for a dock clerk to accuse. So I did the only thing my father's ledger had taught me how to do. I built the proof myself, route by route, night after night, until I had a stack of pages that could not be argued with. And then I did something that still makes my hands shake to think about. I requested, in writing, a meeting with Freya Calder herself. She came down to the dock office at 11 at night in a coat the color of a storm front, and the first thing I noticed was not her face, but her scent. Wet slate and clove smoke, cold and exact, cutting through the diesel and salt of the warehouse like a blade drawn in winter air. She read my pages standing up, in silence, for 11 minutes. I counted those too. "Who else has seen this?" she said, not a question. A woman like Freya Calder did not waste breath on question marks when a flat sentence would do the same work. "No one," I said. I wasn't sure who I could trust with it. "You trusted me. I didn't know if I should." Something moved behind her eyes that I would later learn to call surprise, though at the time I had no name for it. "Most people bury proof like this," she said. "Or sell it." "I'm not most people." "No," she said. "You're not." She shut down 2 routes within the hour and had 4 executives escorted out of the building by morning, and the story that moved through the docks by breakfast was that the Winter Harbor herself had come down to steerage and found the one honest ledger in the whole company. I did not know then that the fraud traced back, root and branch, to a woman named Bianca Sorrel, once engaged to Freya, still circling the edges of the company like weather that refuses to move on. I only knew that 3 days later I was called into an office on the 40th floor and offered a marriage. It was not romantic. Freya said so herself, seated behind a desk the size of a rowboat, her voice as level as a spirit line. Her father's trust required a spouse before her 32nd birthday to retain full control of company shares, a rule written by a man who believed a woman alone was a woman easily taken apart. My father's debt to the Calder lender and Lark's mounting bills sat on the other side of the ledger of my life like a matching column of red ink. She proposed an arrangement, clean and clinical, marriage, her name, my family's debts paid in full, and nothing expected of me beyond appearing, when required, as her wife. "You don't know anything about me," I said. "I know you didn't sell what you found," she said. "That's more than I know about most people I've married into rooms with." I said yes because Lark needed a transplant fund, and because some reckless, unkillable part of me wanted to know what was underneath a coat that cold. 3 weeks later, I stood in a courthouse in a borrowed dress and became Junie Calder, and when Freya slid the ring onto my finger, her hand did not shake, but for 1/2 of 1 second, her thumb pressed against my knuckle like she was checking that I was real. I told myself it meant nothing. I was already lying to myself before the ink was dry. That night, she carried my 2 suitcases up the marble steps of a house larger than the entire street I'd grown up on, and stopped at the threshold, and looked at me the way you look at something you are afraid to break. "This is yours now too," she said, "whatever that turns out to mean." I did not know yet what it would come to mean. I only knew that when I crossed that threshold, some door behind me closed for good, and some other door, one I could not yet see, had just begun, very quietly, to open. The house swallowed sound the way old money always does. Footsteps disappeared into carpet thick as moss, voices dissolved before they reached the ceilings, and for the first week I moved through the Calder residence like someone afraid of leaving fingerprints. My room, technically our room, had a window overlooking the harbor, and at night I would watch the container ships slide past like slow constellations and think of my father's ledger sitting in a drawer 3 floors below, out of place among the antiques the way I felt out of place among the family. Freya's staff were polite to my face and silent behind it, all except Mabel, the housekeeper, a wide, weathered woman who had run that kitchen since before Freya was born and treated every new object in the house, including me, with the same brisk, unsentimental care. It was Mabel who noticed, on my third morning, that I ate my toast plain because I did not want to ask where the jam was kept, and who set a jar of it by my plate the next day without a word, and who told me, stirring a pot with her back to me, that Freya's father had built this house to prove a point to a city that once laughed his own father out of a boardroom. He built it to be unbreakable, Mabel said. Then he raised his daughter the same way. I asked what happened to make her that way, and Mabel only shook her head and said that was not her story to tell, and went back to her pot, and I understood the boundary and did not push it. Not then. The wealth was not subtle. It announced itself in textures rather than words, the give of the carpet under bare feet, the particular hush of a door that cost more than a year of my father's wages, the way the household staff straightened their spines a fraction when Freya's car pulled into the drive, as if her arrival changed the air pressure in the building. I was given an allowance I did not spend, a wardrobe I did not fill, and a silence at the dinner table that Freya and I filled, most nights, with nothing at all. But there were cracks in the coldness, if you knew to look for them, and I was learning, fast, the way you learn a coastline by walking it every day. I mentioned once, in passing, over a dinner neither of us was eating, that my father used to make a stew with too much paprika because he said a man who worked cold water all day needed heat in his belly at night. 3 days later, Mabel set a bowl in front of me that tasted, uncannily, of red pepper and old memory, and when I asked how she'd known, she only tilted her head toward Freya's empty seat at the head of the table. She asked me to find the recipe, Mabel said. Spent an hour on it. Didn't say why. I did not bring it up with Freya. I filed it away instead, the way you file away a single warm coal in a house you still aren't sure isn't going to freeze you out entirely. The second crack came the week I learned my father's old lender had been paid off in full, not through the marriage settlement, which had covered it already, but a second time, quietly, into an account for Lark's transplant fund that had no explanation attached and no paperwork bearing Freya's name at all. I found it by accident, going through mail that had been redirected to the house. When I asked her about it, standing in the doorway of her study with the bank letter still in my hand, she did not look up from the papers on her desk. It's not your business how the company allocates charitable funds, she said. This isn't the company's money. I checked. Her pen stopped moving. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the clock on her mantel, an old brass thing that ticked like it was counting something down. Your sister needed it faster than the fund could move, she said finally. I had it. You didn't have to. I know. She still hadn't looked up. I wanted to. That was the whole conversation. She did not ask for thanks and did not seem to want it, and when I crossed the room and set my hand flat on the desk in front of her, close enough that our fingers nearly touched, she went very still, the way a struck match goes still in the half-second before it catches. Freya, I said. Don't, she said, quiet, not unkind. Careful, the way a person is careful walking on ice they don't trust. Don't what? Don't say my name like that unless you mean whatever comes after it. I did not have an answer ready, and she seemed to expect that, because she looked back down at her papers and the moment folded closed like a letter put away for later. But I noticed, walking out, that her scent had changed. The cold slate warmed, just slightly, clove smoke gone soft at the edges, and I understood without being able to say how. That I had just watched a woman built to be unbreakable hold herself together by force of will alone. It was Mabel who told me, 2 weeks later, about Bianca Sorrel, carefully, in fragments, the way you hand someone a hot dish. Old money, older grudge, once engaged to Freya before the Sorrel family's fortunes and the Calder family's fortunes tangled into something uglier than romance. She still comes around, Mobile said. Board functions. Family obligations neither of them can refuse. She said it like a warning wrapped in gossip, and I took it as one. Feeling Bianca Sorrell's name away next to the warm coal and the paid debt, and the way Freya had said don't like it, cost her something. 3 days later, a car I did not recognize idled in the drive when I came home from the market, and Mabel met me at the door with an expression I hadn't seen on her before, not quite fear, but its close cousin. She's asking for Freya, Mabel says it's about the trust. I did not know yet what that meant. I only knew, standing in the hallway with grocery bags cutting into my fingers, that something in the house had shifted temperature and that whatever was waiting in the sitting room had teeth. Bianca Sorrell was beautiful the way a blade is beautiful, all clean lines and no wasted motion. And when I walked into the sitting room, she looked at me the way you look at something you're deciding whether to step over or step on. So this is her, Bianca said, to the room in general, though her eyes stayed on me. The dock clerk. Junie, I said. I have a name. Of course you do. Her smile did not move past her mouth. Everyone has a name. Not everyone gets to keep it once Freya's finished with them. Freya arrived before I could answer, and the temperature of the room dropped another degree, the specific cold of her scent cutting through Bianca's perfume like a window thrown open in winter. You weren't invited, Freya said. I don't need an invitation to discuss my own family's trust, Bianca said, settling deeper into the chair like she owned it, like she had owned it once and never quite accepted losing it. Your father's clause, Freya, the one about strategic alignment. I do wonder how a dock clerk with debts fits that definition. Her gaze flicked to me again, unhurried, cataloging. Or perhaps that's not the arrangement at all. Perhaps it's something far less strategic. Wouldn't that be interesting if it got back to the board? Get out, Freya said, and her voice had gone somewhere past cold, into a register with no temperature at all. Bianca rose, unbothered, smoothing her skirt with the particular grace of a woman who has never once been made to feel unwelcome anywhere in her life. At the door she paused. I loved your sister too, you know, she said, quiet enough that I almost missed it, aimed at Freya like a blade slipped between ribs. Everyone forgets that part. The door closed. Freya did not move for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice had lost its edges entirely. Eins, she said, was my sister. 2 years older than me. She used to run the northern shipping routes before I did. A pause, her jaw working. The boat that went down with her on it had passed inspection 9 days earlier. My father spent the rest of his life certain someone had falsified those records. He never proved it. He just decided, after that, that sentiment was a liability no Calder could afford again. Control, not feeling. That was the whole of what he taught me. She looked at the window, not at me. I was 19. I have run this company on his rule ever since. Do you believe it? I asked. That sentiment is the liability? I used to. Her eyes found mine, and for once there was nothing guarded in them at all. I'm less certain lately. I crossed the room and took her hand, and she let me, which was its own kind of answer. You don't have to be certain tonight, I said. Junie, my name, in her mouth, sounded like something she'd been rationing. Whatever this is between us, I need you to know I would never let it become a weakness she could use against you. Against Hazel, someday, if we're fortunate enough for there to be a Hazel. She stopped herself, startled by her own sentence, like she'd said more than she meant to. I did not let go of her hand. Then let it be something else, I said. Let it be the opposite of what your father taught you. She looked at our joined hands for a long moment, and when she finally lifted her eyes to mine, the cold in them had gone the way frost goes, when the sun finally clears the ridge, not gone, exactly, but no longer in charge. "Ask me," she said, low, with your words. "Whatever it is you're about to ask me plainly, and I'll answer you plainly." "Kiss me," I said. "If you want to, not because of the trust, not because of anyone else, only if you want to." "I want to," she said. "I have wanted to for longer than I've let myself admit." "Then don't wait on my account." She kissed me like a woman finally setting down something heavy, careful at first and then not careful at all, and when we broke apart, her hand had found the back of my neck like it belonged there, like it had been reaching for that exact place my whole life without either of us knowing it. Her scent had gone warm at the edges. Clove smoke softened into something closer to wood smoke on a night with no wind, and mine, she told me later, had done something similar. Sweetened, she said, the sea salt gone to caramel. I did not know yet that scent could tell the truth a mouth was too frightened to speak. I was learning it in real time, in that room, with Bianca's threat still hanging in the air like weather that hadn't finished arriving. "Tell me to stop," she murmured against my temple, "and I will. Whatever happens after tonight, that will always be true." "Don't stop," I said. "Not unless I ask you to." She didn't, and for the first time since I had crossed the threshold of that house with 2 suitcases and a stranger's ring on my hand, I understood that whatever we were building might not be an arrangement at all. The weeks that followed had a warmth to them I had not let myself expect, the kind that comes cautiously after a long, cold season and still checks the sky for more frost. Freya began coming home before the harbor lights switched on instead of after. She learned, without my telling her twice, that I took my tea with too much honey and not enough patience for waiting on it to cool. I learned that she slept on the left side of any bed, always, a habit she never explained and I never asked about, and that she hummed under her breath when she thought no one could hear. Off-key and unself-conscious in a way the winter harbor was never permitted to be in daylight. We traded scars the way other people trade small gifts. I told her about my father's last winter, the wet cough that never left him. The way I used to sit by his bed reciting shipping routes back to him because it was the only thing that made his breathing even out. She told me, one night with the lamp turned low, about finding Innie's cabin still made up on the ship that returned without her. The bed untouched because Innie's had died on deck instead of in it, and how her father had stood in that cabin doorway and said nothing at all, not one word, and how she had learned in that silence exactly what kind of grief was permitted in their family, and what kind was not. "He never cried," she said. "Not once. That I saw." I used to think that made him strong. What do you think now? I think he was drowning quietly for 15 years and called it discipline. Her hand found mine in the dark. I don't want that for Hazel, if we're fortunate. We were, as it turned out, fortunate faster than either of us expected. I told her on a Tuesday, in the kitchen, holding a small plastic wand with 2 pink lines on it like I was holding something that might detonate. She went very still, the way she did before anything that mattered to her, and then she crossed the kitchen and put both hands on either side of my face like she was checking I was solid, real, not a thing that would dissolve if she looked away. "You're certain," she said. "I'm certain." Junie, just my name again, but it carried a whole speech inside it. I don't have the first idea how to be the kind of parent Innie's, and I never had, but I know exactly the kind I refuse to be. That has to count for something. "It counts for everything," I said, and meant it. The months that followed were the softest of my life. Mubble knitting things in yarn, the color of Hazel's eventual name before we'd chosen it, Freya reading maritime law with one hand resting, unconsciously, on the curve of me, the northern lights of the harbor at night looking, for the first time, like something I lived beside, instead of something I was merely permitted to see from a borrowed window. It could not last, of course, not in a house with Bianca Sorrel circling its edges like weather refusing to move on. The blow, when it came, arrived by courier in a manila envelope addressed to the board of directors, and, as a courtesy no one had asked for, copied to the house. Freya read it, standing in the front hall, still in her coat, and I watched her face do something I had never seen it do before. Not harden, but flinch, quick and total, gone before I could be sure I'd seen it at all. "What is it?" I said. "An allegation," she said, "that our marriage was contracted under undue emotional influence, filed by a concerned party citing the estate's own trust clause against sentiment-based governance decisions. If the board finds merit, my father's clause reverts control of 40% of company shares to an oversight panel." She looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked afraid. "A panel Bianca's family controls 2 seats on. She's using your father's own rule against you," I said, "against us." "She's using the fact that I love you against us," Freya said, quiet and precise as a blade drawn slow from a sheath. "My father built a clause to punish sentiment. Bianca only has to prove that sentiment exists." I felt the floor of the last several months tilt under me. "So what happens now?" Now, Freya said, folding the letter along its original crease, with hands that had gone very steady, the particular steadiness of a woman locking a door against a storm. "I have a meeting with the family's council tomorrow. And you are not going to like how I have to speak about us in that room." I did not understand then what she meant. I would understand it 3 weeks later, sitting in a rocking chair with our daughter asleep against my chest, listening to my wife's voice through a 3-inch gap in a door, calling the truest thing in my life convenient, nothing more, and I would not yet know that the coldest sentence she had ever spoken to me was, in fact, the most protective one she had ever built. The lawyer's name was Reginald Voss, a narrow, precise man who had served 3 generations of Calders and trusted feelings the way he trusted weather forecasts, useful in theory, never to be relied upon in practice. He laid the trust language on the table between us like a hand of cards already played. "The clause is unambiguous," Voss said. "Marriages contracted primarily for personal sentiment rather than strategic benefit to the enterprise are grounds for review. Miss Sorrel's filing alleges exactly that. If the board agrees, 40% reverts to oversight, and Miss Sorrel's family holds 2 of those seats. The marriage began strategically," Freya said. "Flat, controlled, that's a matter of record." Began, yes, Voss did not look up from his papers. "But the filing includes household staff testimony regarding, and I'm quoting carefully here, affectionate conduct inconsistent with an arrangement of convenience. If you contest that testimony and lose, the board sees it as concealment. If you concede the marriage has become a love match, you hand Sorrel exactly the proof she needs." He finally raised his eyes. "There is a third option. You state, on record, in front of the board and any witnesses present, that the marriage remains what it began as. Convenient, strategic, nothing more. It closes the inquiry before it opens. That's a lie," I said, before I could stop myself. Voss did not so much as glance at me. "It's a legal position. Mrs. Calder, the board doesn't require truth. It requires a defensible record." I looked at Freya, waiting for her to say what I needed her to say, that there was another way, that she would find it the way she found everything else, with force and money and will. Instead, she looked at the table for a long moment, and when she spoke her voice had gone somewhere I did not recognize. "I'll say it," she said. "Once, in the meeting. Nowhere else." "Freya, it protects Hazel's inheritance," she said, still not looking at me. It protects you from becoming a headline in a custody filing Bianca has already drafted. I'd bet everything I own on it. It buys me time to prove what she actually did 9 years ago on my sister's ship, instead of losing the company defending a truth the law isn't built to hear. Now she looked at me, and the fear in her face was real, and it was not fear of Bianca. I need you to trust that the words are a shield and not a confession. I know that's a great deal to ask. It's an impossible thing to ask, I said, and say it anyway, if it keeps her safe. I believed, walking out of that office, that I understood what I was agreeing to. I did not understand what it would feel like from the other side of a nursery door, stripped of context, landing in my chest like a verdict instead of a shield. Understanding a plan in a lawyer's office is not the same as surviving its execution, and no one had thought, in all that careful legal architecture, to warn me exactly which afternoon the sentence would be spoken, or that I would be nursing our daughter 3 inches away when it was. That is where the story catches up to itself, to the rocking chair, to the counted breaths, to Hazel's small weight going still against me, while 4 words rearranged the furniture of my heart. I did not know, in that moment, about Voss or the claws or the shield Freya believed she was building. I only knew the sound of my own name, or rather the absence of it, in a sentence spoken to protect a company from a woman I had not yet learned to hate as much as she deserved. I sat with Hazel until she woke and fed again, and then I did what my father's ledger had taught me to do with anything that didn't add up. I went looking for the truth myself. I found Freya in her study an hour later, and I did not knock. She looked up, and whatever she saw in my face made her rise from her chair immediately, the papers on her desk forgotten. "You heard," she said, not a question. "I heard exactly 4 words," I said. "Convenient, nothing more." "I didn't hear the part where it was supposed to be a shield, Freya, because you never told me it was happening today, in front of who, or why I'd be nursing our daughter 3 inches from a sentence you knew would gut me." "Junie, don't." My voice cracked on the word, and I hated that it did. "You told me I could trust the words were a shield. You didn't tell me I'd have to hear them blind, with no warning, holding your daughter, wondering if 11 months of proof to the contrary had just evaporated because a lawyer told you to say it that way." She crossed the room and reached for me, and I stepped back, and something in her face broke open at that, raw in a way I had only seen once before, the night she told me about the cabin that returned empty. "I am trying," she said low, "to keep this family standing. I am doing it the only way I know how, which is the way my father taught me, and I am beginning to understand, in real time standing in front of you, that his way might be the very thing that costs me you." She stopped, breathing unevenly. "Tell me how to do this differently, and I will. I don't have another architecture built. I only have the one he gave me. Then we build a new one," I said together, "or not at all. I am not something you protect by hiding me from the plan. I am the plan, Freya, or I should be." She nodded, slow, like a woman setting down a weapon she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was heavy. "Then help me finish this," she said, "because Bianca isn't done, and I would rather face whatever's next standing beside you than in front of you." I did not fully forgive her that night. But I stayed, and I listened, and somewhere in the listening, the 4 words began to lose their grip on my chest, loosening one finger at a time. The way a fist finally does when it remembers what it was holding was never meant to be held that tight. Bianca's second blow came 4 days later, and it did not arrive as an envelope. It arrived as a woman in a pale coat standing in our foyer at 7 in the morning, with a photographer's assistant hovering by the door and a folder of documents she did not bother to disguise as anything but a weapon. "I have a source inside the trust office," Bianca said. before Freya had finished descending the stairs, who tells me the board meets in 3 days to review the marriage inquiry. I thought I'd give you the courtesy of knowing I intend to be there. With evidence. Real evidence. This time, not staff gossip. Her eyes slid to me, to Hazel asleep in the sling against my chest, and something in her expression sharpened into cruelty, including a rather interesting question about whether a child conceived so quickly into a marriage of convenience was, in fact, conceived within that marriage at all. The room went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the season. Freya's voice, when it came, had gone past anger into something with no bottom at all. You will not speak about my daughter. I'll speak about whatever keeps my family's seats on that board, Bianca said. You took Inez from me first, Freya. Don't act shocked that I'm willing to take something back. The words hit the room like a struck bell, and I felt Freya go rigid beside me. You, Freya said, very quietly, are the reason I don't have a sister. Prove it, Bianca said, and smiled, and left, and the photographer's assistant scurried after her like a shadow that had forgotten to wait for its owner, and I stood in my own front hall with my daughter's heartbeat against my ribs and understood, finally, exactly what kind of war we were in. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with my father's ledger open in front of me, the one relic I had carried out of my old life into this one, and I began, the way I had begun once before at a dock office at 11 at night, to build a case out of numbers no one else had thought to add correctly. It took me 2 days, and most of the money in savings I didn't tell Freya I still had, hiring a forensic accountant Mabel's nephew knew from his own shipping days. Cross-referencing 9-year-old inspection records against the falsified manifests I still remembered by heart from my very first case at Calder Maritime. Bianca Sorrell's fraud, the one that had first put me in Freya's path, was not new. It was the same signature, the same fractional shaving, the same hand at work 9 years earlier on the inspection records of the ship that had carried Ines Calder to the bottom of a shipping lane, in a storm the official report called unavoidable. It was not unavoidable. The ship had failed a load balance inspection 9 days before departure. The failure had been quietly reclassified as passed. The same week, Bianca Sorrell's family logistics firm handled the vessel's final certification. I sat at that kitchen table at 3 a.m. with proof of a 9-year-old murder in my hands, and I thought of my father saying steady hands find the way home, and I understood, finally, precisely what my hands had been built to find. I brought the pages to Freya at dawn, and I watched a woman who had spent 15 years believing her sister's death was an accident she should have somehow prevented learn, in the space of 4 minutes, that it had been engineered instead, by a woman who had once worn her ring. She did not cry. I do not think Freya Calder had cried, truly cried, in 15 years, but she sat down on the kitchen floor, right there on the tile, and put her head against my knee, and I held her the way I had once held my dying father, steady and silent, and let her shake without asking her to explain it. She killed my sister, Freya said finally, and then she tried to marry the guilt out of me, and when that failed, she came for the one thing I built that she couldn't touch. She looked up at me, eyes red-rimmed and furious, and, underneath the fury, finally, unmistakably free. She is not going to touch Hazel. She is not going to touch you. I am done letting my father's silence be the only architecture I know. Then, let's finish it properly, I said. Together. In front of everyone who ever doubted either of us. The board convened on a Thursday morning in a room with a harbor view so wide it made the water look like it belonged to the family personally, and Bianca Sorrell arrived 12 minutes late in a coat the color of a blade, folder in hand, certain of her own victory in the particular way of people who have never once lost anything that mattered. She opened with the inquiry, reading the trust clause aloud like scripture, citing staff testimony, citing the timeline of Hazel's conception with a delicacy so calculated it was crueler than shouting would have been. The board listened, some sympathetic, some merely curious, all of them watching Freya's face for the crack Bianca had promised them. Freya did not give her one. Instead, when Bianca finished, Freya rose and set her own folder on the table and did not open it yet. Before the board rules on my marriage, Freya said, I'd like to address a different matter of trust governance. The inspection certification irregularities on the Northern Route vessel that sank 9 years ago, killing my sister, Ines Calder, aboard a ship your family's firm certified as seaworthy 9 days after it failed load balance inspection. The room went very still. I have the original inspection record, the falsified reclassification, and a forensic audit trail matching the exact fractional discrepancy pattern used in the manifest fraud I personally shut down 11 months ago, the fraud my wife uncovered. At great personal risk, before either of us knew we would one day be family. She opened the folder. The audit trail is signed. The falsifications traced to an account controlled by Bianca Sorel. The gasp that moved through the boardroom was not performative. Bianca's composure, so total a moment before, cracked visibly, her mouth opening on a denial that had no ground left to stand on. You can't prove intent, Bianca said. Coincidence isn't a crime. 9 years of coincidences, Freya said. Beginning the week you learned my father intended to promote Ines over you in the Northern Division, and ending the week you filed a sentiment inquiry against a marriage you knew, better than anyone, was not the liability my father's clause pretends sentiment always is. You didn't come here to protect the trust, Bianca. You came here because you have spent 9 years terrified someone would finally add the numbers correctly. Someone did. Bianca's mask did not so much slip as shatter all at once, years of composed cruelty collapsing into something raw and ugly. Ines was going to leave the company for you, she said, voice rising for the first time. She was going to hand you everything I'd worked for since I was 19 years old. And no one was ever going to stop it, so I stopped it myself, and I have spent 9 years watching you build a life on top of a hole I dug, and you don't even have the decency to thank me for how hard it's been. Carrying that alone. You didn't carry it alone, Freya said. Quiet now. Almost gentle, the gentleness somehow worse than fury. You built it. Alone, and now you'll answer for it. Alone, security had already been called before the confession finished. Bianca Sorel was escorted from the boardroom in handcuffs 20 minutes later, her family's board seats suspended pending the fraud investigation, her name already moving through the financial press like a stone dropped in still water. I stood at the back of the room with Hazel against my chest and watched every board member who had spent 11 months looking at me like a mistake reassess me, in real time as something else entirely. The clause, Voss said quietly, into the ringing silence after Bianca's removal, is moot. There's no inquiry to answer when the accuser is under indictment for the murder the clause was meant to guard against in the first place. Freya crossed the room, past the stunned board, past Voss, and knelt in front of my chair, taking both my hands in hers in front of every person who had ever doubted us. I have one more thing to say for the record, she said, loud enough to carry. My marriage to Junie Ashworth Calder was not, is not, and was never merely convenient. It is the truest thing I have ever built, and I would burn every share in this room to the ground before I called it anything less again. The board, to its credit, applauded, though I barely heard it over the sound of my own pulse. Odalis Pharaoh, Freya's second, who had run interference with the press outside for the better part of an hour, appeared in the doorway with an expression I had never once seen her wear. 15 years, Odalys said, to no one in particular, watching Freya's thumb move gently over my knuckles, and I have never once seen her kneel for anything. That night, in the quiet of our bedroom with Hazel finally asleep in the bassinet beside the bed, Freya asked me, formally, with the kind of care she gave to nothing else in her life, whether I would let her claim me properly, not the courthouse arrangement that had begun us, but the bond itself, the mark that meant something in Omega's body could not unmean. "Tell me to stop," she murmured, lips at the curve of my neck, "and I will, tonight or any night, and it will change nothing about what I said in that boardroom." "Don't stop," I said, and felt her breath catch against my skin like she'd been waiting 11 months to hear exactly that. "Ask me properly first." "Junie Ashworth," she said, low and certain, "will you let me mark you as mine, freely, in a way no clause and no lawyer's language can ever again make sound like convenience?" "Yes," I said, freely, completely. The bite, when it came, did not hurt the way I'd braced for. It felt like a door finally closing on a house that had stood open to weather for 11 months, warm at last, sealed against the cold for good, and the bond that opened between us afterward carried her feelings to me plain and unguarded for the first time, relief and terror. And a love so total it embarrassed her to feel it, all of it flooding through the new channel between us like a tide, finally allowed back into a harbor built to hold it. A year turned over the way years do, quietly, in the ordinary accumulation of small Tuesdays, and by the time the harbor outside our window had gone gold with a second summer. The house that had once swallowed my footsteps into its carpets had learned my voice the way it had always known Freya's. Bianca Sorrell pled guilty to fraud and manslaughter in a courtroom 3 blocks from the docks, where I had once counted mismatched cargo weights under a buzzing light, and the judge, unmoved by the Sorrell name, gave her the maximum the law allowed. Freya did not attend sentencing. She sat instead in the nursery that morning, Hazel propped against her shoulder, and said only that some debts were better left to the law than carried home. Lark, 16 now and 2 years past her transplant, moved into a small apartment near the university on a scholarship the family's foundation funded anonymously until she found out and threatened, laughing, to return every cent out of pure spite. She visits most weekends and calls Freya, to Freya's visible and unadmitted delight, nothing but winter. Odalys still runs the Northern Division with the same gruff efficiency she always has, though she has developed, against every instinct in her body, a habit of bringing Hazel small carved wooden boats from the docks. And the sight of the company's most feared operations chief crouched on our nursery floor demonstrating not work to a delighted 1-year-old remains, in my private opinion, the funniest thing I have ever witnessed in that house. We married again, properly, on a morning in early autumn, not because the law required it, but because we both, separately, decided we wanted to stand somewhere and say the true thing out loud with witnesses this time. Mabel cried through the entire ceremony and denied it fiercely afterward. Freya knelt this time too, not out of ceremony, but because Hazel had crawled straight for her the moment vows finished, and there was nowhere else in the world Freya Calder would rather have been than folded onto the ground with her daughter in her arms and her wife's hand on the back of her neck. "Steady hands find the way home," Freya murmured that night, turning my father's ledger over in her hands, the leather worn soft as old rope. Hazel finally asleep between us. I used to think that was just something dock workers said to comfort themselves in bad weather. "It's older than that," I said. "It's what you say to someone you're not sure will make it back, so they know somebody's waiting." I like that better, she said, and set the ledger on the nightstand, where it has stayed ever since. Beside a small carved boat and a photograph of a woman who once sat frozen in a rocking chair, certain the coldest sentence of her life had been the truest one. It was not the truest one. It was only the loudest, spoken into a silence built to protect what it could not yet say plainly. The truest sentence took a boardroom, a confession, a bite freely given, and a year of ordinary Tuesdays to arrive properly. But it arrived, and it stayed, the way the tide always finds its way back to a harbor built to hold it, no matter how far out it was once forced to go. Love, in the end, was never the liability her father feared. It was only ever the thing strong enough to survive being mistaken for one. The end.